Okay, let's be real. You hear these names floating around all the time in the news, right? Think tanks, NGOs, international organizations, they all seem to be working on the same huge global problems, like counter-terrorism or fighting corruption. But what do they actually do? And what's the difference? Well, let's break it down.
And this is probably why it gets so confusing. They all have a hand in shaping what happens on the world stage. They're all part of this massive ecosystem that influences global policy. But, and this is the key, they each play a totally distinct role.
So, how are they different? And more importantly, why should you even care? Well, because if you really want to understand who pulls the levers of power and influence in our world, you've got to know who's who in this lineup.
First up, let's talk about think tanks. And I gotta say, I love this title for them, the architects of ideas. It's perfect because that's exactly what they are. Their currency isn't money or formal power. It's research, analysis, and big ideas.
So, what is a think tank when you boil it all down? It's basically a research institute that's laser-focused on policy. Their entire job is to think, to research, to analyze complex problems, and then to publish their findings and recommendations. They don't pass laws, they just generate the ideas that might become laws. To make this concrete, just think about the world of national security. A think tank is the group doing the deep dive threat analysis, figuring out what the next big risk is. They're the ones developing complex strategic frameworks and, maybe most importantly, offering a whole menu of policy options for governments to choose from.
Ultimately, their entire game is about turning ideas into influence. The goal is to shape how policymakers and the public understand a problem. Because, as you know, if you can define the problem, you're already halfway to controlling the solution.
Okay, next up we have NGOs, which you've definitely heard of, non-governmental organizations. And if think tanks are the architects, then NGOs are the drivers of action. Their focus is all about getting things done, getting boots on the ground.
The name really says it all. An NGO operates independently of any government. Their goal isn't just to think about problems, it's to actively get involved through implementation, through advocacy, or by delivering services directly to people who need them. The key word here is doing.
And that doing covers a massive range of activities. We're talking about everything from delivering food and medical supplies in a disaster zone to monitoring and reporting on human rights abuses. They could be campaigning hard for a change in the law or supporting local, community-based work. It's all very tangible, on-the-ground stuff. So for them, the core function is crystal clear: turn direct action into real-world impact. Their success isn't measured by a report they published, but by the tangible changes they made or the people they helped.
And that brings us to our third and final category, international organizations, or IOs. Think of these as the coordinators of states. They're playing a totally different game, one that's all about bringing entire countries together.
Now here's the absolute game-changing difference. An IO, like the United Nations or the World Bank, isn't an independent actor like an NGO. Nope, they are created by states through formal treaties and agreements. Any power they have is given or delegated to them by their member countries, and it's always for a very specific purpose.
And their activities really reflect that. IOs are the neutral territory where countries can negotiate. They're the venue for adopting resolutions that can be binding. And they're the bodies that set all those international standards we take for granted, whether it's for air travel safety or global finance. They basically manage the world's rulebook.
So their function is pretty straightforward. Get countries to coordinate with each other. They provide that essential framework that allows nations to work together on shared problems, from climate change to pandemics, and to create agreements that stick.
Okay, so we've met the players, the architects of ideas, the drivers of action, and the coordinators of states. Now for the really interesting part. Let's put them all side by side and see how they actually interact to shape our world. So if you had to nail it down, what's the single biggest difference between these three? Well, it all comes down to one little word: power. Where do they get it from, and what are its limits? Let's just break this down. A think tank's power comes purely from the influence of its ideas. But its limitation? It has zero formal authority to make anyone do anything. An NGO gets its power from its actual on-the-ground impact. But again, it has very limited formal power to force a government to change. And finally, an international organization. It has real delegated authority, but that authority is completely limited by the will of the member states that gave it that power in the first place. And here's how they all work together in the real world. It's like a relay race. So, step 1. A think tank might publish a groundbreaking report on a new kind of cyber threat. Step 2. An NGO grabs that report and uses it to campaign for action, providing their own data from the field to show it's a real problem. And then, step 3, an international organization provides the stage for countries to come together, negotiate, and formalize a solution, maybe in a new treaty. You see, they really need each other.
All right, before we wrap this up, let's just quickly bust a few common myths about these groups. Because if you get these distinctions, you'll be way ahead of the game when you're trying to figure out what's really happening in world events.
First up, this idea that think tanks make policy. Nope, not true. They're influencers, not deciders. They shape the conversation, they advise the people in power, but they are never, ever the ones signing the bill into law.
Myth number 2. NGOs are always neutral. Not necessarily. While some are purely focused on delivering humanitarian aid, a lot of them are advocacy organizations by design. They have a very clear point of view, and they are actively campaigning for a specific outcome. They're players in the game, not just referees.
And finally, the big one, the myth that international organizations are some kind of independent world government. They're just not. Think of them as tools created by states for states. They are fundamentally limited by the political will of their members, period.
So if you remember nothing else from this, just remember these 3 words. Think tanks are about ideas, NGOs are about action, and international organizations are about coordination. Ideas, action, coordination. That's the entire ecosystem in a nutshell.
So I'll leave you with this question. The next time you're reading a headline about some global crisis or a big international agreement, take a second and ask yourself, who were the players behind the scenes here? Can you spot the think tank report that kicked it all off, the NGO that was campaigning on the ground, and the international body where the deal was finally hammered out? Can you see the hidden architects shaping our world?